The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training grounds as recruits lined up for what many considered the most challenging test of their careers. General Marcus Rodriguez stood before them, his weathered face bearing the marks of 30 years in service. His eyes swept across the young faces, stopping briefly on each soldier before moving to the next. "Gentlemen and ladies," the general's voice boomed across the field. "Today you face the ultimate test of endurance, skill, and mental fortitude. The 100-mile tactical march with full combat gear has broken stronger soldiers than you." Among the recruits stood Jake Thompson, barely 22 years old, fresh from a small farming town in Nebraska. His frame appeared smaller than most of his fellow soldiers, and several recruits exchanged glances that suggested they doubted his capabilities. Jake noticed these looks but kept his focus straight ahead, remembering the words his grandfather had shared before he left for basic training. General Rodriguez continued his briefing, his voice carrying the weight of authority built over decades. "In my 30 years of service, I have seen only 12 soldiers complete this march in under 18 hours. Only true legends reach that distance in such time. The current record stands at 17 hours and 43 minutes, set by Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen 5 years ago." The general paused, allowing his words to sink in. The 100-mile tactical march was notorious throughout the military. It required soldiers to navigate through dense forests, cross rivers, climb rocky terrain, and maintain formation while carrying 60 pounds of equipment. Many soldiers took over 24 hours to complete it, and some never finished at all. Jake's mind wandered to his childhood on the farm where he had spent countless hours walking behind tractors, helping with harvest, and running through cornfields that stretched for miles. His father had always told him that physical work built character. But Jake wondered if farm work could truly prepare him for military challenges. The general's voice brought him back to attention. "The march begins at 0600 hours. You will carry full combat load, including weapon, ammunition, water, medical supplies, and survival gear. There are 4 checkpoints along the route, where you will receive additional supplies and medical evaluation. Anyone showing signs of serious distress will be removed from the exercise." As the briefing continued, Jake observed his fellow recruits. Maria Santos from Los Angeles had completed 3 marathons before joining the military. David Park from Chicago had been a college football player with impressive physical statistics. Rebecca Martinez from Texas came from a military family and had trained for this moment her entire life. Each recruit seemed to have some obvious advantage or preparation that Jake felt he lacked. The night before the march, recruits gathered in the barracks to prepare their equipment and discuss strategy. Conversations buzzed with nervous energy as soldiers checked and rechecked their gear. Jake methodically organized his pack, ensuring every item was accessible and properly secured. His grandfather had taught him that preparation prevented poor performance. "Hey, farm boy," called out Tommy Wilson, a recruit from Boston known for his sarcastic comments. "You sure you can handle this? It's not like walking through wheat fields." Several other recruits laughed, though not maliciously. Jake simply nodded and continued his preparations. Rebecca Martinez, who had been listening to the conversation, approached Jake's bunk. "Don't listen to them," she said quietly. "I've watched you during training. You have something different about you, something steady." Jake appreciated her words but wondered if steadiness would be enough. The march would test every aspect of a soldier's capabilities, and he had never attempted anything close to this distance under such challenging conditions. That evening, General Rodriguez made his rounds through the barracks, a tradition he maintained before every major exercise. When he reached Jake's area, he paused. "Thompson, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Jake responded, standing at attention. "Where are you from, son?" "Nebraska, sir. Small farming community outside of Omaha." The general nodded thoughtfully. "Farming teaches patience and persistence. Those are valuable qualities for tomorrow." He moved on without another word, leaving Jake to wonder what the general had meant. Sleep came fitfully for most recruits that night. Jake lay in his bunk, listening to the sounds of his fellow soldiers tossing and turning. Some whispered prayers, others reviewed mental maps of the route, and a few simply stared at the ceiling. Jake found himself thinking about his family back home, and the pride they would feel regardless of his performance. At 4:30 in the morning, the barracks lights blazed on, and drill sergeants began the process of getting soldiers ready for the march. Breakfast was substantial but carefully planned to provide energy without causing digestive issues during the long journey ahead. Jake ate steadily, focusing on foods he knew his body could process well during extended physical activity. As dawn approached, the recruits assembled at the starting line. Each soldier had been assigned a number and timing device to track their progress. Jake was number 47 out of 63 participants. The early morning air was crisp and filled with anticipation. General Rodriguez stood before them one final time before the march began. Remember, this exercise is not just about physical endurance. It tests your mental toughness, your ability to problem-solve under stress, and your commitment to completing the mission regardless of personal discomfort. He looked directly at several recruits as he spoke, his gaze lingering momentarily on Jake. Some of you believe you know your limitations. Today you will discover whether those beliefs are accurate or whether you have underestimated your own potential. The starting signal echoed across the training grounds at exactly 6 o'clock. 63 soldiers began their journey into what would become one of the most challenging days of their military careers. Jake settled into a steady rhythm, drawing on years of farm work that had built endurance he didn't fully recognize. As the group moved through the first few miles, natural separations began to form. The fastest soldiers pulled ahead, maintaining an aggressive pace that impressed observers but concerned experienced non-commissioned officers who knew the dangers of starting too quickly in ultra-endurance events. Jake found himself in the middle of the pack, moving at a pace that felt sustainable while monitoring his breathing and heart rate. His grandfather had always emphasized the importance of pacing when working long days in the fields, and Jake applied these lessons to his military training. The first checkpoint came at mile 25, located at the base of a series of hills that would test every soldier's climbing ability while carrying heavy packs. Medical personnel evaluated each recruit, checking for signs of dehydration, overheating, or injury. Jake passed through quickly, his vital signs strong and his equipment properly maintained. By this point, several soldiers had already fallen behind schedule, and 3 had been removed from the exercise due to medical concerns. The leaders maintained their rapid pace. But Jake noticed signs of strain beginning to show even among the strongest performers. As the march continued into more challenging terrain, Jake's farming background began to show its value. Years of walking on uneven ground, carrying heavy loads, and working in various weather conditions had prepared his body and mind for sustained physical effort in ways that gym training alone could not replicate. The second checkpoint at mile 50 marked the halfway point of the grueling march. By this stage, the initial group of 63 soldiers had been reduced to 48 active participants. 15 soldiers had either been medically withdrawn or had voluntarily stopped due to exhaustion, injury, or equipment failure. Jake arrived at the checkpoint in 15th position, surprising many observers who had expected him to struggle more significantly. His steady pace had allowed him to gradually move up from his starting position in the middle of the pack. More importantly, he showed fewer signs of distress than many soldiers who had started ahead of him. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the chief medical officer overseeing the exercise, noted Jake's condition as she conducted her evaluation. Heart rate elevated, but within normal parameters for this level of exertion. Hydration levels good. No visible signs of heat exhaustion or muscle strain. Clear for continuation. As Jake prepared to leave the checkpoint, he observed the soldiers who had arrived before him. Maria Santos, who had led the march for the first 30 miles, now sat with her head in her hands, clearly struggling with fatigue. David Park, the former football player, was receiving treatment for severe blisters that had developed despite his careful preparation. The route from the second checkpoint included the most technically challenging terrain of the entire march. Soldiers had to navigate through dense forest, cross 2 streams without bridges, and traverse a series of steep, rocky inclines while maintaining their pace and protecting their equipment. Jake's rural background proved invaluable during this section. Growing up on a farm had required him to navigate natural obstacles daily, whether chasing livestock through wooded areas or repairing equipment in remote locations. The skills he had developed through necessity now served him well as he moved through terrain that slowed other soldiers significantly. As the march progressed into the afternoon, Jake began to notice that he was catching up to soldiers who had been far ahead of him earlier in the day. His consistent pace, which had seemed conservative in the morning, was proving to be more sustainable than the aggressive strategies employed by others. At mile 65, Jake encountered Rebecca Martinez, who had been among the leaders throughout the morning. She was sitting beside the trail, clearly in distress, with her ankle wrapped in medical tape. "What happened?" Jake asked, stopping despite knowing that any delay would affect his time. "Twisted my ankle about 3 miles back," Rebecca replied, wincing as she tried to stand. "The medic said I can continue if I want to, but it's going to slow me down significantly." Jake looked at his watch and calculated the time remaining. If he maintained his current pace, he would finish well within the standard completion time, but he wouldn't threaten the record that General Rodriguez had mentioned. However, helping Rebecca would certainly eliminate any chance of a fast finish. "Come on," Jake said, adjusting his pack. "We can make it together." "You don't understand," Rebecca protested. "You've been moving really well. You could have a great time if you don't stop for me." Jake considered her words but thought about the values his family had instilled in him. "The mission includes everyone getting home safely. Let's go." Together, they developed a system where Jake helped stabilize Rebecca as they moved through difficult terrain. Their pace slowed considerably, but they maintained steady forward progress. Other soldiers passed them during this section, and Jake watched his position in the group drop from what had been 8th place back to 20th. The third checkpoint at mile 75 presented another medical evaluation. The checkpoint commander, a senior non-commissioned officer with extensive experience in endurance training, observed Jake and Rebecca's arrival with interest. "Martinez, how's the ankle?" he asked. "Manageable, Sergeant. Thompson has been helping me maintain pace." The sergeant turned to Jake. "You realize you've probably given up a top 10 finish by helping her?" "Yes, Sergeant. But that's not why we're out here." The sergeant nodded approvingly. "Sometimes the mission is bigger than individual performance. Both of you are cleared to continue." As they prepared to leave the checkpoint, Jake checked his watch and made a disturbing calculation. Even if he left Rebecca behind and pushed hard for the final 25 miles, his current time would only allow for an average finish. The time he had spent helping her had eliminated any chance of an impressive individual result. Rebecca seemed to read his thoughts. "Jake, you need to go ahead now. You've already done more than enough to help me. Don't sacrifice your entire march for my mistake." Jake looked at the trail ahead, then back at Rebecca. The final section of the march included some of the most challenging terrain, and he knew she would struggle to complete it alone with her injury. Yet he also realized that his assistants up to this point had demonstrated the teamwork and leadership qualities that the military valued. "I'll stay with you until we can see that you'll make it safely," Jake decided. "Then I'll push ahead for the finish." They continued together for another 8 miles, their pace remaining steady despite Rebecca's injury. During this time, Jake found himself thinking about the nature of competition and success. He had never considered himself particularly competitive, but the march was revealing aspects of his character that surprised him. At mile 83, they encountered an unexpected situation that would change the entire dynamic of Jake's march. Tommy Wilson, the recruit who had mocked Jake's farming background, was sitting beside the trail in obvious distress. His face was flushed, and he was breathing heavily despite the relatively cool afternoon temperature. "Wilson, what's wrong?" Jake called out as they approached. "I think I'm having heat exhaustion," Tommy replied weakly. "I've been pushing too hard trying to stay with the leaders. I feel dizzy and nauseous." Jake immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. Heat exhaustion could rapidly progress to heat stroke, which was potentially life-threatening. He helped Tommy move to a shaded area and began applying the first aid techniques he had learned during medical training. "Rebecca, can you use your radio to call for medical support?" Jake asked while monitoring Tommy's condition. As they waited for medical assistance, Jake continued cooling measures and kept Tommy conscious and responsive. The medical team arrived within 15 minutes and confirmed that Tommy was indeed suffering from heat exhaustion, but would recover fully with proper treatment. "You probably saved him from a much more serious situation," the medic told Jake. "Heat stroke can be deadly," and he was heading in that direction. The medical evacuation of Tommy meant that Jake and Rebecca were now alone on the trail, with just over 15 miles remaining to the finish. The sun was beginning to set. which would make navigation more challenging, but would also provide relief from the heat that had affected several soldiers throughout the day. "Jake, you've helped 2 people today," Rebecca observed as they resumed walking. "That's not going to show up in any official results, but it's the kind of leadership the military needs." Jake appreciated her words, but he found himself thinking about the general's comments regarding legendary performances. He had never considered himself capable of extraordinary achievement, but the march was revealing reserves of strength and endurance he hadn't known he possessed. As they entered the final section of the course, Jake made a decision that surprised both himself and Rebecca. "I'm going to make sure you finish safely, and then I'm going to see what I have left for the last few miles." Rebecca looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" I want to see if a farm kid from Nebraska can show these military athletes something about determination." At mile 92, Jake helped Rebecca reach the final checkpoint, where medical personnel confirmed she could safely complete the remaining 8 miles despite her ankle injury. The checkpoint commander noted their arrival time and shook his head sympathetically. "Thompson, you've shown excellent leadership today, but you're looking at about a 20-hour finish time if you maintain your current pace. Still respectable for your first attempt at this distance." Jake nodded, accepting the assessment while privately calculating his own numbers. He had been tracking their pace throughout the march and knew the checkpoint commander was correct based on their recent speed. However, Jake also knew something that others didn't recognize: he had been holding back significantly while helping his fellow soldiers. "Rebecca, you're going to make it from here," Jake said confidently. "The trail is well marked, and you've got plenty of time to finish safely." "What about you?" she asked, sensing something different in his demeanor. "I'm going to find out what I'm really capable of." With those words, Jake began running. Not the desperate sprint of an exhausted soldier, but the steady, powerful stride of someone who had been conserving energy for exactly this moment. His grandfather had taught him that the best farmers saved their strongest effort for when it mattered most, and Jake had internalized that lesson completely. The transformation was remarkable. Throughout the day, Jake had appeared to be simply another recruit, struggling through a challenging exercise. Now, as he moved through the final miles with increasing speed, observers began to realize they had witnessed something extraordinary. His pace over the first 92 miles had averaged nearly 13 minutes per mile, while helping 2 injured soldiers and navigating challenging terrain with a full combat load. Military endurance experts considered 12 minutes per mile to be an excellent pace for this type of event under ideal conditions. As Jake ran through the gathering darkness, his mind entered a state that athletes sometimes call the zone. Every step felt effortless, his breathing remained controlled, and his focus narrowed to the simple task of putting one foot in front of the other as quickly as possible, while maintaining perfect form. Behind him, word of his sudden acceleration spread through the radio network that connected all checkpoints and support personnel. General Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the exercise from the command center, requested updates every few minutes as reports came in of Jake's unprecedented pace through the final miles. "Sir, Thompson just passed mile 95, reported a checkpoint observer. His pace over the last 3 miles has been just under 7 minutes per mile. We've never seen anything like this during the final stage of the 100-mile march." "Okay." General Rodriguez studied the timing sheets, calculating Jake's projected finish time. If he could maintain even a portion of his current pace, he would not only achieve a respectable completion time but might actually threaten the standing record. At mile 97, Jake encountered the final significant obstacle of the course, a steep hill that had broken the spirit of many soldiers throughout the day. Instead of slowing down, he attacked the incline with the same relentless pace he had maintained since leaving the final checkpoint. Support personnel, positioned at various points along the final miles, watched in amazement as Jake powered past landmarks that typically marked the point where soldiers began their final struggle to reach the finish line. His form remained strong, his stride consistent, and his determination obvious to everyone who saw him. The finish line came into view as Jake crested the final hill. Floodlights illuminated the area where General Rodriguez waited, with several senior staff members and medical personnel. A small crowd of soldiers who had already completed the march gathered to watch the remaining finishers, unaware that they were about to witness military history. Jake's watch showed 17 hours and 38 minutes as he crossed the finish line. The official timer confirmed the result. He had not only broken Lieutenant Colonel Chen's record but had shattered it by 5 minutes, an enormous margin in an event measured in seconds and minutes of difference between top performers. The immediate reaction was stunned silence. General Rodriguez approached Jake, who was breathing heavily but showed no signs of the severe exhaustion typically displayed by soldiers completing the 100-mile march. "Thompson," the general said, studying the timing sheets one more time to ensure accuracy. "You just accomplished something I thought was impossible. A 5-minute improvement on a standing record is unprecedented in this exercise." Jake straightened to attention despite his fatigue. "Thank you, sir. I had excellent preparation growing up on a farm." The general's expression showed both amazement and respect. "Son, what you did today goes far beyond good preparation. You showed tactical intelligence by pacing yourself properly, leadership by helping fellow soldiers, and extraordinary physical and mental toughness by maintaining that pace through 92 miles, and then accelerating when it mattered most." As word of Jake's performance spread throughout the base, soldiers who had dismissed him as just a farm kid began to understand that they had completely misjudged his capabilities. The quiet young man from Nebraska had demonstrated that true strength often comes in unexpected packages. Dr. Hayes conducted Jake's post-march medical evaluation and found results that surprised even her experienced assessment abilities. "His recovery rate is remarkable," she told General Rodriguez. "Heart rate returning to normal parameters faster than we typically see, hydration levels still good, and no significant muscle breakdown indicators. His body was prepared for this level of stress in ways our standard fitness tests don't measure." Over the following days, Jake's performance became the subject of extensive discussion throughout military endurance training circles. Coaches and trainers analyzed his technique, studied his background, and attempted to understand how a relatively unknown recruit had achieved such an extraordinary result. The answer, as Jake explained to anyone who asked, lay not in any secret training method or superior natural ability, but in the lessons learned through years of honest work and the understanding that real strength reveals itself when others need help, not just when personal achievement is the goal. Rebecca Martinez, who finished the march successfully despite her injury, became one of Jake's strongest advocates. "People focus on his record time," she would tell others, "but what impressed me most was that he was willing to sacrifice his performance to help others. That's the kind of soldier you want beside you in real combat situations." General Rodriguez incorporated Jake's performance into his future briefings about the 100-mile march, but always emphasized that the most important aspect wasn't the record time, but the character displayed throughout the entire exercise. "True legends," the general would tell new groups of recruits, "are measured not just by their personal achievements, but by how they treat others when no one is watching, and when helping costs them something valuable." Jake remained humble about his accomplishment, understanding that his success resulted from preparation, opportunity, and the support of fellow soldiers who had encouraged him when others doubted his abilities. He never forgot that his record-breaking performance had been built on the foundation of helping others succeed. And he carried that lesson throughout his military career and beyond. Years later, when asked about the secret to his success, Jake would simply say, "My grandfather taught me that you can't harvest what you don't plant, and you can't achieve what you're not willing to work for." Sometimes the work includes helping others along the way. The 100-mile march record stood for many years after Jake's achievement, a testament to the extraordinary combination of preparation, character, and determination that had produced one of the most remarkable performances in military endurance history. But for those who witnessed it, the lasting memory wasn't just the broken record. It was the quiet farm kid who had shown everyone that legends can come from the most unexpected places.